Might want to minimize that.
Okay, we are beginning. Let's do a little opening logo here from Peter. We're going to have sound to go with it, but that's assuming that we can manage to do stuff. Don't you like all the steampunk motifs and worry things and time travel and all the rest? Tortugan.wordpress.com. And if you have my scan thing. Anyway, hello. Evolution Hour 32. We have some guests today. We have Jackson and Crocosquirrel.
Hello.
Say hi, guys.
Morning.
Morning.
Bloody afternoon.
I don't know. I'll figure it out eventually.
Time zone that I am. But anyway, is going to be a show that connects up with some of the previous discussions that I've had, but is a wonderful example of trying to pry loose what goes on inside the minds of creationists. Scary thought. By what they say and what they don't, you can get a clearer idea of what's going on inside their head. And one of the tropes that just hit this back and forth that I was having with a creationist in Twitter, going on about the flaws of evolution, that in order for evolution to be true, there should be just thousands, millions of flawed, deformed fossils in the fossil record that show the mutations that are occurring that don't lead anywhere and that cause the animal to end, that eventually supposedly are required for creating actual animals. And I go, what the hell does he think is going on here? Because that's exactly the opposite. It doesn't involve deformities and weird half of this and partial that. But one of the things that's so clear, transition is an obvious example, continuous, that it's nothing but fully formed, completely complete animals that are perfectly functional within their environment, and that the slow adaptive elements that are working on particular mutations eventually lead to the things that you eventually see as really, really different. There's no partial halfy things going on. You don't have, in the jaw case, you don't have a matter of where the dentary bone is doing sort of half of something rather than something that's actually functional all the way along the line. Or the bird case, the classic example there, the cliche still pops up in creationist literature and commentaries about a half wing. Oh, how wings developed on birds, and there's nothing half about it. That the fully formed arm is the thing that becomes the wing. It doesn't need to be a half something. It only needs to be feathered. You've got the groundwork for flight, even the natural motions. And Maniraptor and theropods in particular make their semi-lunate carpal bones and the way their muscles are attached and all that. The flapping motion is a natural thing for them to do. You have a hell of a lot of pre-adaptation, and every single one of them is formed and functional all the way down the line. And so the fact that the creationist imagines that there's got to be all of these deformed hunchback Archaeopteryxes running around that are mutants, the opposite of the truth. And because they never see that in the fossil record, they can go, aha, evolution, because the thing that evolution says shouldn't happen. What's wrong with this picture? Feedback?
They don't know what they're talking about. That's what's wrong with the picture.
Meow. Jackson?
Okay. Well, I think part of it is your methods questions. What I think we should start off with is what do you think happened? I think that'd be better than trying to explain to them, oh, we have these organisms, we have a list of fossil species which have increasingly tetrapod-like features, but they're all fish. Or instead of trying to explain a lineage to them, we should ask them for their own criterion. What would they expect for this organism?
Then you'll find out they don't have any.
Exactly. Or they give you some nebulous answer like, oh, well, it should be some kind, so, between two different kinds of animals, because
but yet you can literally never pin them down on it. And this is not because they're being disingenuous or fibbing. Literally have never thought about this. They've never thought about it, ever. evolutionists. This is one of these 100% failure rate things. Reading through anti-evolution literature for a hell of a long time. That's one advantage of reading lots and lots and lots of it, even though your eyes may threaten to glaze over. But the point is you can see them not talking about something. You can see them not conceptualizing it, even within their own framework. The anti-evolutionists literally cannot imagine what a transitional form would look like or explain the data that we physically have in detail. To try. So that's a point where dull as a sack of hammers, if you ask that question, but they'll just kind of go like Mark Huffman did in the debate with me, was just, what? Huh?
You're in headlights.
And that's why it's useful to have an external audience for these sorts of exchanges. The more the merrier, so that they can see the person crash and burn, themselves seeing it, because they're never going to see it. You don't find purposes an anti-evolutionary paleontology.
Well,
We're going to be able to explain the data.
Ask Genesis history if there are paleontologists.
Oh yeah, well, and again, the proof is in the pudding.
Why would you ask them? You already know what the answer is.
Well, see, we looked up that guy, and he was in his 60s or so. He was an older guy.
Well, you've got the anti-evolutionists will wax verbose on paleontology, but the number of anti-evolutionist paleontologists is extremely small, and literally I can count them on like one hand. You got Kurt Wise, who's a young Earth creationist. You got Marcus Ross, who's a newcomer, who's a young Earth creationist. You can sort of put Leonard Brand in there, although technically his training is in geology. Adventists that pop around and do archaeological, paleontological digs now and then. And then over on the intelligent design side, Beckley, Günther Beckley, who's an insect paleontologist, and he has apparently got religion, and now he's on the intelligent design bandwagon, and is their in-house paleontologist now at the Discovery Institute, where he posts occasionally on subject matter in which he never explains what the hell he thinks happened. And he doesn't discuss insects, hominids and all that. I did a previous evolution hour where I was talking about some of his stuff. And I will be waiting.
Question. May I ask a silly, stupid question?
Go ahead. I'll give a silly, stupid answer.
But, you know, if he's an insect paleontologist, why, oh, why is he not talking about insects?
Exactly
why is he talking about fossil hominids?
Well, creationists are never interested in foraminifera and diatoms and mollusks. They're only ever interested in dinosaurs and birds and mammals, you know.
Well, that's because those.
Well, ultimately us.
Those are the things that lead to we as humans and the creatures that were supposedly specially created by God to rule over all. And if they can poke holes in that particular part of the lineage, or try and find a way to separate it, then they have the thin end of their wedge for the Bible.
Yeah,
and we can't.
Yeah, that's true. And virtually all anti-evolutionists get eye-twitchy over human origins. That's why they're an anti-evolutionist, because they need for us to be specially created by God. They've got to have all of that aspect to it. We've got to have the little smiling face of the deity behind it. And all of their apologetics, even if they don't bring up, is directed at that point to undermine the argument. Well, Beckley at least jumps right in. One of his posts so far has been about hominids. Doesn't like the idea that basically it's the dodge of all this new data that's come up on apparently human beings go back to 300,000 years in northern Africa, which is kind of an interesting new wrinkle on the range and human.
I'd like to see where that. I'd like to see it
that popped up.
That. Last I checked, the number was under 200,000.
Well, no, this actually in that it's outside the normal range of the AFAR triangle stuff that's part of the usual range. So that's a fascinating discovery.
Is there a citation for it?
Australopithecines don't go away. But no, if it's in a technical, I can't remember if it's Nature or one of the others. It's recent stuff, perfectly fine work, and it'll be thrashed out over the years. It doesn't cause my jaw to drop, because I never would have argued that we know every blip on the scope in the same way on the scope of bird origins before Archaeopteryx. That's why you have question marks. But it doesn't make the blips go away that are already there. So you've still got Australopithecines, you've still got Homo erectus. We have a huge data field before 300,000 years ago about what's going on. And the other fossil that Beckley was riffing off of was the one where they were finding early primates that enter into the issue of how primate dispersal was occurring before you get to the basal hominids. And that's new, interesting, fascinating information, but it doesn't make Australopithecines go away. And so what he needed to do, and one of his critics that even got lambasted by the Discovery Institute on it, pointed out, asked the very same question that I was thinking about. What does Beckley think happened? What design events were happening over any of that time frame? Pick one and tell us. Apply your intelligent design theory. Well, the problem is they don't have one. Never going to be able to explain anything created at some point in a manner that we don't think about. And that's not ever going to cut it. Fun to see is the longer Beckley writes posts at the Discovery Institute. Oh, I will say hello to Animal Man. Hi, Animal. The more we're going to be able to look under his hood. He may actually bump into somebody, some pointed methods questions. Time, what evidence would persuade you to change your mind? What degree of the data field you're going in? Are you disavowing all the work you've done on insect systematics, which sounds evolutionary to me? Or is there only a problem with human evolution, but insects are evolving like all get out by natural selection? We don't know what he thinks.
Well, there's, Bergman and those other morons who say, oh, horseshoe crabs and dragonflies haven't changed, and centipedes haven't changed in millions of years. So this is evidence of creation, not evolution.
Oh yeah. The living fossil trope is really popular. It's almost as big of addiction as origins or bust. I've got a whole stack of stuff down in my pending files to do in future updates, where I've been tracking all the different.
There are still coelacanths, folks.
Yeah, and they are not the same as their ancestors.
I was actually reading a paper on horseshoe crabs that Jerry Coyne linked to on Twitter, and so he's talking about how it's not exactly stasis. There's been quite a lot of evolution going on here.
And yet another connections. I think YouTube is having connection fits somewhere today. Talking with Jackson before the show began, that when I was looking up to set up this show today, into my creator studio, all of my main videos were gone on the list. Check to see how many people are viewing and all of that. And it turns out they seem to be testing some kind of a beta format system that they're trying to get people to pay attention to. I fortunately have saved all the URLs for all my videos in a doc file that I have in reserve, so I was able to check to find out, no, my videos are still online. I just couldn't see them in window that I wanted to look at. So whether or not this gets corrected or not, we'll find out later on. But yeah, that living fossils trope, they first of all falsely claim, and usually because they never bother to read any of the original material, falsely claim that they have not changed in millions of years. So what do you mean by change? Trilobites or horseshoe crabs, which by the way are chelicerates, they're close cousins to spiders and scorpions. Those little critters have been a very nice little niche market. They get along nice. They got a cute little shell. They come up, they do their egg laying, and then go back into the sea again and have a happy time. And why change? Nothing about evolution requires things to change, but the species that exist today aren't the ones that existed in the past. There are different genera and sometimes even different families over time. There's been variation on them. Just don't do that. You noticed, Jackson, the section I had on ants and Michael Denton. Same mistake with ants. He thinks, well, they all look kind of ant-like. But in fact, there's a huge amount of variation. So if you're going to say ants are all basically ant-like, you might as well say humans are basically primate-like, which is also true.
Well, I mean, that's the kind of thing like a high schooler would say about, I think, all plants. Yep, they're plants.
Yeah, my simple taxonomy, for me, there are roses and non-roses. And there are cows and non-cows. And so that's a simple taxonomy, but it's way more complicated than that. Crocodiles, in fact, I can't remember whether it was in tip 1.4 sections. I think it was tip 1.4 where I went into crocodiles and some of the, or maybe in tip 1.5, one of the two. The evolutionist was trying to wave crocodiles as an example of a living fossil. Ask a crocodile expert, and they'll tell you that crocodiles have gone through an enormous amount of change. And what we're seeing is the kind of minor, very diverse lineage, which modern ones are kind of hunkered back into a more cold-blooded layout. Others were much more active, probably much closer to warm-bloodedness in their metabolism, especially all the ones that were the marine crocodiles that had flippers and all the other kinds of stuff.
Oh, yeah,
but needless to say, don't bother to look. The crocodile heart is perilously close to a mammalian-style four-chamber heart. It's very much more complicated than your standard reptile model.
Yeah, we were talking about that just before this started with the atosaurs that I saw or the atosaur fossils that I saw in New Mexico. Of course, you also had like the running crocodiles. You had the Rawasuchians. You had the crocodile-like phytosaurs. Those guys are there also.
And then there's my favorites, the Lagasuchids, the rabbit crocs, that are the bipedal critters that are just at the basal group that are leading off into the earliest of the dinosaurs. Mm-hmm. I'll put a little chart up since we're about a third of the way through that I had pulled. There's several different versions of this that you see popping up occasionally, and I'm still very rudimentary, so I'm using the old clumsy approach. But it illustrates the basic problem that in general, which is to say, what does a transitional thing look like? Everybody seeing all the going left to right and blue to red on the screen? Hopefully. I will assume everybody is seeing that.
I thought it was red to blue, not blue to red.
Well, there we go. Well, it depends on whether you're going back in time or not. But the nice thing about it is also this done with text that starts up one color in one area and ends in another color at the end. But the point is that any point in the spectrum, you can look through here, and at no point are you seeing abrupt changes identical to the band previous to it. But only because of the long gradual change do you realize that what started out blue ends up red. There is no point when a line jumps from blue to red. There's no abrupt transition or saltation, as would be used in the evolutionary bit. Saltations don't happen. And
no what monsters?
Yeah, and the other bit is that in the context of this discussion here, what the creationist is expecting is a whole bunch of browns and greens and black mutants popping up instead of a smooth spectrum. And so they're expecting to see all of those weird deformed Archaeopteryxes flapping around, or deformed therapsids. And because those don't exist, they mistakenly think that they've disproven evolution. In the same way that the Crocodoc, the Crocodoc, good old, what's his name, the actor?
Kirk Cameron.
Kirk Cameron, yeah. When he put up the Crocodoc as saying that there are no Crocodocs and this disproves evolution. I'm going, if I ever bump into him, I will ask him, okie dokie, do you mind telling me what paleontologist came up with this idea? He'll have to say, will not have bothered about it, but in fact, no paleontologist ever suggested a Crocodoc. In fact, a Crocodoc, which is a duck's head a crocodile's head photoshopped onto a duck's body, is exactly what cannot possibly be the root. A feature like a pigostyle format bird grafted onto an archosaur that does not have the features of a basal bird structure the way we can see in the theropods. Nope, this is not that. So you would then ask them, well, could God make a crocodoc? If God could do that, then God, in failing to make crocodocs, has really missed an opportunity to stick it to evolution, because no evolutionist could ever explain a crocodoc from a natural breed. Crocosquirrel, yeah, yes. Oh, or the dreaded Crocostimpy, for those of you who are aware of Ren and Stimpy. Yeah, Animal has pointed out
long time ago.
In a galaxy far, far away. But Animal Man mentions Caprisuchus and Metriorhynchus and Simasuchus and Notasuchus and good gravy. I actually pronounced them correctly, hopefully. Boy, those are tongue twisters. That are all examples of things that disprove crocodilians as living fossils. Yeah, it's used as a trope. You know, you've got ginkgos, you've got the Tutara lizards, and the
even though
cute little.
Yeah, those rhynchocephalians, they've had a very diverse history. Also, we were looking at that aquatic rhynchocephalian, Ankylosphenodon.
Yeah, yeah, they're an amazing range, and the problem too is are most prone to be relying upon apologetics that is old, and they're not keeping up with the paleontology.
Back to your example about the ginkgo. There's the one pine tree also applies here. I forget its name off the top of my head, but those things can survive 10, 15, 20,000 years. There's a ginkgo that's been identified as being at least tens of thousands of years old. Their lifespans are very high, and they are very long, and they have a fairly slow germ cycle. Yeah. As a result, you're not going to get as much change in a ginkgo as you're going to get in, say, I don't know, monkeys that have been suddenly tossed out, or apes that have suddenly been tossed out of the trees into a savanna.
And also, in the vertebrate department, coelacanths are an example of this. Fossil kinds of critters tend to be generalists. They can eat anything. They can live in a broad range of habitats. So there's no reason for them to alter. They get along just fine with the model that they got. You know, it's like look at how the structure of how the Jeep or the other things that if you got a good model, why change it? Animal brings up the newly discovered dinosaur Halscaraptor, kind of like a crocodoc. If memory serves me, is that the one that's that aquatic one?
Yes, it's got a sort of goose-like frame because it's semi-aquatic and from China.
Yeah, which is really interesting. It's one of the earliest, the first example of an aquatically adapted bird dinosaur thing. And I'm not sure. I think it is actually listed as a dinosaur rather than a bird.
It's a Maniraptor.
So that's really interesting. That the dinosaurs didn't seem terribly good at adapting to. We don't have dinosaur counterparts. They may have existed, we just don't find any fossils of them yet, but they couldn't have been very prominent if they were. That's the counterpart of plesiosaurs and pliosaurs. Plesiosaurs are your classic Loch Ness Monster style thing, supposedly. And your mosasaurs that are apparently off of more of a snake offshoot, and your ichthyosaurs that look kind of like reptile dolphins. Most of them are developing in the Triassic period. And there's a wonderful old paleontologist, a blind guy, matter of fact, which is an amazing thing to be a blind paleontologist, but shows how meticulous he is. But he would argue that the dinosaurs, or when you're invading a new niche, if the niche is already well occupied, so you're not likely to be able to do that. So the movement into a new niche, one thing that's fascinating about the birds is they managed to get a leg up or a wing up against the pterosaurs in the Cretaceous particularly, and they began to dominate the daytime niche. And almost all the little Rhamphorhynchids, the little itty-bitty pterosaurs, basically got pushed out of the field. And all of the pterosaurs, pretty much, big glider style, those Quetzalcoatlus and all that kind of stuff. So they're clearly able to hold on in a niche that the birds aren't able to do, in the same way that bats, which may well have developed even in the KT, it's not entirely sure based on the genetic data, but definitely are showing up by, what, 55 million years ago. So after that, they're on the scene, and eventually are developing echolocation. They don't start out with doing that. But they basically live in nocturnal environments. If the birds are there, the bats ain't going to be there. But in an environment where the bats have it to themselves, you have daytime flying bats, and they do all sorts of fun stuff like pollinating, I think, chocolate. Or no, bugs do that. The tequila tax, pollinated by bats.
There are some like fruit trees that they do that too.
Yeah, we forget that the bees aren't the only ones that do those things.
I wanted to point out, you mentioned coelacanths. In my video, New Kinds, I have a little graphic in there that shows a range of different coelacanth phenotypes throughout time, and they are very diverse. There was actually a coelacanth from Egypt, I think, from the Cretaceous, that was larger than a man. You know, it was like...
Yeah, no, not surprised.
It was Mawsonia.
Aaron Raw touched on it as well. The coelacanth wasn't a single species; it was a whole. It was a whole taxa unto itself. But modern coelacanths are much different from their forebears.
Yeah, and they live in just a very narrow niche environment, but they're generalists. They get along quite nice. They were hard to find, for one thing, because they lived at depth. Come up, they weren't getting caught very often. And they're very hard even to find in their natural habitat. But that's true of a lot of animals. I mean, we still don't know a hell of a lot about what sperm whales do for eating, because they hunt really deep. And it's very, very difficult to keep track of them. But that doesn't mean they don't do stuff.
Well, they do all kinds of things. I think that part of the reason they hunt at depth is because the niche above that area just isn't going to be enough to support them. Not with humans overfishing to extreme levels.
Yeah.
That's going to be a whole thing.
Animal Man brings up Mawsonia, the giant coelacanth that was hunted by the giant Spinosaurus.
Yeah, that was the one I was thinking about. Also, RJ, here's the... I'll try to put in the... Oh, it won't let me do it. Okay, well, here's the paper on House Corrector, so you can tweet that or do what you want with it. I just found it. I had it on file, so there we go. But yeah, every case, it seems, where there's, quote, stasis, which I should probably do a video about that, is
because it pops up so much in their apologetics.
It's like, all is not what it seems, I think, is a good way to put it.
It's static only if you don't look really close. And yeah, that's 21 December. Yeah, I believe I've got that in my already on that. Nature, Science, and PNAS are ones that I do pass through every single week. They're the kind of core tip of the iceberg, cover lots and lots and lots of different subject matter. And so an awful lot of papers will pop up in one of those venues. Science and Nature are behind paywalls, although occasionally some of it pops up free, and a huge block of it will be accessible somewhere for free as the years go by, because the professors will put it up on their websites, or it'll be posted on ResearchGate or something like that. And as an impoverished scholar, I can well make use of that. But everything at PNAS is free after a year. The technical papers pop up right from the get-go, particularly ones of great or political importance, things on climate change, or some of the stuff on social issues and that, and neurobiology and stuff that really have an effect, or medical things, are often full text right from the get-go. And everybody that doesn't have pnas.org immediate look at file is missing a spectacular opportunity. In fact, I think I mentioned last week that is a great place to get your sea legs on science reading, intimidated by science papers that use jargon and all the rest. Just poke around in older material. You can just pick almost anything at random or on a topic that interests you, and search around for a paper that's in that context. Open it up, save it, read it at your leisure, and figure out, well, how much of it do you understand, what terminology is snagging or not, and those are putting up flags so you can start understanding stuff. But I guarantee you, it's not rocket science, even if it's rocket science, that everything in there accessible and understandable. You just need to look up terms, become familiar with the jargon, and gradually you get your sea legs, because it's like riding a bicycle or anything else. It's a skill by doing it. And since you can access it free, you can do it on your leisure.
You see, before you can do any kind of thing like that, you must learn the language, which means a really good dictionary for science, for a really good science dictionary is an absolute boon.
Or Wikipedia terms, and look up the Wikipedia entry on it, and it's not the end of your discussion, but it'll give you a sense of where it is in terms of the popular culture, in terms of the scientific literature. They may mention controversies or issues involved, and every one of those things becomes an avenue of investigation. Broaden your resources on. That's why I would suggest that somebody does that with something that they really are interested in, like me. Why I know a lot of these taxa and stuff is not because I'm just researching it for #tip. It's because I really like dinosaurs. In that, no matter what. So any topic that is one that you just like right off the bat is a prime opportunity to be able to delve into the science literature and kind of wean yourself off of the secondary redacted ones that do the generalized discussion, the Scientific American level, which is a fun intro. A lot of good explainers. Carl Zimmer is a fabulous example of that. He's a science journalist, and he is really knowledgeable. And Brian Naish, paleontology themes. A whole bunch of people, and I follow them on Twitter. I just stumbled on a thing from Brian Naish about this nincompoop who is arguing all dinosaurs were aquatic. Just tossing this stuff up again.
Wow.
Hadn't heard about it.
Wow.
Yeah,
didn't they put that one to bed in the late 1800s? I could have sworn they put that.
Microbiologist, apparently, in his bonnet, all the dinosaurs were aquatic, and he's been fielding this argument for years, and he's been by paleontologists constantly that he's just got all of his bloody facts wrong, and he still keeps at it. And Brian Naish had written a very fun takedown of him and then I found out there had been some more stuff that had been done, and gradually got some more technical. So I have a new little niche that I've opened up for Tip, because it does relate to the issue that dinosaurs could swim. An awful lot of them could, but they weren't exactly spectacular at it. You only need to be able to swim better than the thing you're about to eat. So theropods only need to swim a bit better than their sauropod prey to make it disadvantageous to go in the water. And that's an argument that's been put up. But the idea that all dinosaurs were aquatic, and that they're just going, whoa, and he's way out of his field of expertise. But anyway, that was another one where I only found out about that because of the various people that I follow on Twitter. We're a little past half of the show. Let me here through this rigmarole. Downward is an old fart, and it has to go hunting around for his damn buttons, how to do things really super duper fast. That's the thing. I'm making a slight comment on this. I would like to thank everybody, Stephen and Dyer and Eats and Yui and Mona and Hendril and Jen and Jody and Daniel and Eric and Staggles and Alex and Totus Rial and Paul Williams. I will point out my WordPress site, tortugan.wordpress.com. If you don't have it on your thing, why not? Stop in and say hi. It gets lonely a tip at times, not knowing if people are paying attention to it and downloading material. It's got a hell of a lot of stuff there in PDF format, and please use it, share it. You can download it, and read it instead of some of the stuff that might make your thinking of more peculiar, like creationist stuff. This started out through patreon.com. However, I've got to point out that it looks like there's a lot of problems with Patreon. And in fact, one of my patrons has pulled back from his contribution, not because he doesn't like my work, but because he is pretty sure from his other stuff that he's done for other patrons that we don't get the money. And I can tell you, I haven't gotten any of the money. That they've got a lot of different weird ways of thresholding things and putting barriers in place. So basically, they're sitting on top of a ton of money that people are giving them, and they're basically able to get the interest off of that, and it doesn't get downstream. So I am instead saying, please, if you want to help the project, I'll still, if you put up a perfunctory patron thing, you'll be on my list through that route too. And maybe Patreon will finally get their act together and get better organized. So I won't say don't do that. And I will still put the current videos up at Patreon site. So I'll be keeping up on that area. But if you really want to support the project, please, 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 easy way from my end is the GoFundMe.com DCGo. Because that stuff, I literally get that in a couple days. And I don't have to guess about their reliability. They're good. And the same way that for anybody that's buying any of my books, that Amazon in particular is Johnny on the spot fast. Literally get after the end of each month. So I get book royalties on things. So I know exactly how I can deal with it on that. So not to say Patreon is a complete washout, but boy, it's not yet. And so the GoFundMe is one that I can really trust on there. And I would love to see the crowd show up in numbers. I know people who hear me gripe on this kind of thing before. And it's a frustrating thing that kind of is a useful measure working or difficulties of it. But I do notice how really effective creationists are in their funding operations. That's why Kent Hovind can start up a new museum thing that he's doing on his site and get all sorts of stuff. Whereas in cats on our side, and it's not as though there are not people out there. I've got 2,000 people following me on Twitter. And if you look at the people who follow me, followers often. So there's literally tens of thousands of people out there that could crowdfund all of this stuff if they did it. You know, $5.
RJ, you're also following the law. Kent Hovind is not and has not been for 27 years, according to him.
That's true. That's true. If I lacked all integrity and decency, I might have been able to make more money at this and that. But anybody who wants to support the project can do it in a variety of ways. They've got the GoFundMe. Any amount of value is fabulous on this. And I appreciate absolutely everybody. There's been over 160 people who have helped. But when you compare that to the tens of thousands of people that can be marshaled overnight, literally, culture, to funnel money into things. When Bill Nye had his debate with Ken Ham, NCSE, the National Center for Science Education, didn't get an upswing in their support, but Ken Ham did. And so their side tends to move at a speed that is annoying. In some ways, it may be a cognitive architecture of our brains. We don't do leaps of faith very well. And therefore, we don't tend to jump onto things even when people are recommending them. So that slows things down. But meanwhile,
churches also ask for 10% tithings. You could start doing that, RJ.
Yeah, that's another thing that I suppose I'm shooting my foot off of the fact that everything at TIP is free. And I never want to have advertisements. I don't want to have any of that stupid clickbait floating around on stuff to where what you see is for you to use, any strings attached. In fact, when some people said about a couple years back, it's kind of slow going for your GoFundMe, well, you need to sell some product. So take some of your material from your site and turn it into something and make it a book and sell it. And I said that I can't do that because I've already posted all of that stuff. 3 Macroevolutionary Episodes is a book-length work. It's free, and I'm not going to make it suddenly sale. So then when I found out how to be able to do Slam Dunk, that's when I went ahead and did something because it's all new. It's not material that's up at the old site. It's all completely up to date to fill a niche. Eventually, if I can keep at all the work, all of that stuff will eventually be folded into. But at the moment, I'm literally in a place where I can't print out the data stream effectively because I can't afford ink. I can't even handle the fuel oil. So I'm on Social Security, and still that's the majority of my income that I'm having is that non-tip related stuff. So technically it's kind of like a hobby that's getting a little bit of trickle income. So anyway, there's my horrible can rattle. I please anybody that can help, and tell anybody else who can help. Anybody that's been following the shows or reading my material knows that I'm not an idiot. And I'm trying to contribute something that nobody has ever done before, which is to build up a genuine network of people who are knowledgeable and armed. Their time is better spent. Jackson, you know directly that I was able to speed up the process on that Nature paper that you were wondering about and saved you a lot of trouble in investigating it.
Absolutely. I will never forget Proto-Avis.
Yeah. Yeah, he was working. He was jousting with a creationist, and they had thrown a Nature paper at him, and it's an old paper. And again, it's often difficult to find out. It's a commentary piece. It's not a technical paper. And so Jackson just happened to mention to me on Twitter, and I says, "Oh, yeah, that's the Proto-Avis thing. I discussed that with Dwayne Gish. That was something that was in the 1990s, and no one would have any access to that online." Stuff from the 1990s books that isn't available online. Is kind of off the scope if all you're doing is looking at what's published online. I'm trying to remedy that to where you have an absolute data set of everything so that nothing can be hidden anymore. And then the other thing is the methods angle. In a methods approach, that it isn't as though you don't pay attention to the top level of philosophy and God or matter and religion versus politics and all these issues, because they play a big role in anti-evolutionism. Start at the bottom up, at the source level, as how they build their arguments, what data do they pay attention to, what data do you pay attention to, how do you construct material from that level, and you'll find out how bad they are at this game, and it also improves the whole argument.
Yeah, the time I asked you to look up the claim about dinosaurs, the average dinosaur size, which they'd gotten from Jurassic Park. That was
or rather the author of Jurassic Park.
Oh, yeah,
it wasn't even from the movie,
Michael Crichton.
just from his.
Yeah, it was the second book. It was the Lost World. That's what it was.
It doesn't matter.
Either way.
Animal says that Aaron Raw is a good series on the reptile-mammal transition, and indeed he does. In fact, he does an awful lot of very nicely illustrated, quick summary videos on the whole of taxonomy. Basically, he's running through the whole shebang on there, and you can see from the sheer number of them how much of a shebang there is to do. Animal asks, can I talk about irreducible complexity? About irreducible complexity. He laughed derisively.
I was actually just talking
about subject. About that, there's a section. I have quite a lot of material in various venues on the subject. If you look at the old Creationism Light chapter at TIP, see that, and that's all on a lot of stuff about Michael Behe, his stuff. And then also I went into the Imapendum case in tip 1.7 on that. It was kind of a dry run then for what I did on the bacterial resistance stuff. That he was trying to make a thing. This involved the Dover trials. It was in the context of that. And then, of course, for heaven's sakes, evolution slam dunk. I took apart this whole discussion of attempting to use the chloroquine resistance thing with the reptile-mammal transition. And Jackson, you know how dismal that argument was, and I hope I did a pretty good job of flattening him.
Well, flattening Behe is easier than slicing tires. It doesn't take much of anything.
At the source level, yes. He's very popular, and so specifically on the irreducible complexity thing, for those of you in the audience that don't know what that is, irreducible complexity is the argument. It had been knocking around in creationism before Behe, but Behe put the current tag on it and helped popularize it in Darwin's Black Box, which came out in 1996. So it's about 20 years old. And he argues that there are some biological systems
that have not aged well
together. The bacterial flagella, the immune system, the blood clotting sequence, and there's a couple others that he fiddles with, that he argues have interlocking components that are absolutely impossible to have originated by natural Darwinian incremental variation, that they have to all be in place in order to work. The problem with that is that none of that is true. And when you start looking at the bits and pieces at the source level, you can start seeing how he's basically doing a God of the gaps argument, where he's pointing to the things we don't yet know that we know enough about it to maintain that it's irreducibly complex. And that's kind of the short form on that. Even to this day, the poster child of the IC argument, which is the flagellum, we're just now starting to figure out a lot of the pieces of it. The motor proteins, cleverly called moat A and moat B, it turns out that they have homologies to other biological systems. That's only been discovered in the last couple of years. The big mystery involves the cap that sits on top of the flagellum that allows it to form in low flagellum concentrations. That's an interesting puzzle that they're not worked out as to why that's occurred. But yet, stuff that makes up the filament of the flagellum self-assembles in large quantities. It's also a thing that I had spotted. It apparently triggers off an interleukin response in the immune system. And so it's a good argument to be made that before it became a wiggly thing, it was involved in attacking other organisms at an inflammation. And the core of the flagellum is still
type 3 secretory.
It's called a pump system. And in fact, intelligent designers play a shell game because it looks like existing type 3 secretion systems co-opted the system that was used in the flagellum, not the other way around. And so that they use that as saying, well, then that means it can't have evolved. No, you numbskulls. It just is that the precursor of the flagellum was a secretion system. It still functions as a secretion system in a great many organisms if they don't form a flagellum there. And what happened then has been co-opted in other organisms. It probably happened billions of years ago. And that this also is developed into the wiggly flagellum thing as a co-opted variation, which is how evolution works. But needless to say, all the people in this field tend to stay kind of far away from the data stream. Even Scott Minnick, if you are familiar with him, he's actually a flagellum researcher who's an intelligent design guy. He co-authored or contributed to exactly what we don't know. Steve Meyer's Explore Evolution book that's I discuss in Slam Dunk because it took on the reptile-mammal transition very badly. So all of these dramatis personae things, the short form is that irreducible complexity is a pile of crock. The more you look into the details of it, the more problematic.
Actually,
not a pile of Crocodoc. It's just a crock.
It was
there's no Crocodoc here either.
Just the other day, I was actually talking to a creationist, or actually, there was a thread coming from a creationist about how, and it started because this guy said ribosomes couldn't, no, he said topoisomerases couldn't evolve. So I got on the internet for about 5 seconds and found a paper on the origin and evolution of topoisomerases. So then I went to his bio, and he had another article, or he had another post that said ribosomes couldn't evolve. So after about 5 seconds on the internet, I found the origin and evolution of ribosomes.
Yeah, and indeed, one of the big discoveries, I pointed this out several times, I think, on the origins of life discussions that I put up on these hours, is the fact that it was a big surprise and delight model when they discovered that the core that actually plugs the amino acids together in the ribosome is an RNA ribozyme, not a protein. And this is just screaming that the process of proteins forming from amino acids is knee-deep in the self-replicative connective properties of the RNA world that gradually the scientists are working out. We got some wonderful questions in there from Animal. I'll try to get at both of them. He's heard that, or she, I don't know, if Animal Man, I'm assuming you're male. I've heard that giraffes are irreducible complex, even though we have a decent fossil record on giraffes evolution. Yeah, well, they argue that there's no anti-evolutionists. Both intelligent designers and YECers have trotted out the giraffe because supposedly its long neck is a mystery. But we've actually got more fossils now, and the genetics and developmental biology of giraffes is better known. It's also probably shouldn't bring up because of the long laryngeal nerve that the giraffes have that goes this long way around, and the reason why is because it got stuck under vertebrates. And so as the neck enlarged, because the expanded to make the longer neck in evolution, it just carried all of that wiring along with it. So you have this nerve that just goes way around when you could have easily just had to go boop across the short distance if you were designing it to be that case. Another thing that's interesting is that mammals are really boring when it comes to the components like vertebrae. So giraffes and mice and us all have 7 neck vertebrae.
I was just
And
about to ask about that.
Only one or two exceptions to that. I think manatees and I think a sloth has 1 extra vertebrae. And it means that there's a very
3-toed sloth that was found with 8, if I remember correctly.
And it's only 1 variant. It's just 1 more. And clearly we aren't very plastic when it comes to those sorts of components. Rib structure, the vertebrae in general, for carnivores, for example, there's a dynamic pressure against that, because it turns out that if you start playing around with rib numbers too many, things that are going to affect its ability to run fast and therefore catch dinner. So there's a whole bunch of dynamic works that have been developing on the adaptive pressures on this, which needless to say, anti-evolutionists pay no attention to. Now, over in dinosaur land, you've got a very different structure, because dinosaurs just spew variations. And so if you look at all those sauropods, they have an enormous range of neck size. And they do it not by elongating the things, they do it to some extent, but they also add vertebrae. Mamenchosaurus has way more neck vertebrae than an apatosaurus. So clearly they've got a system where you've got probably a particular HOX gene or some counterpart to it will have a thing where an amino acid repeat will produce more neck vertebrae. And we don't know what that is because we don't have any living dinosaurs to look at their DNA. But we know in the case of our digits, 5 alanine repeats in the HOX13. Add a 6th one, you get 6 fingers. Make it 4, you got 4 digits. In other words, it's just a simple variation that produces how many little things you do. And when you add on, you get the musculature attached, all the stuff that fits into it, do it. So that's how some variations can take place. Digit reduction also occurs, particularly in aquatic forms. So even forms that start out with a fully developed hand, when they start swimming, if you go on long enough, you end up with whales and the like, where you start having the phalanges merging, and you'll have variations where you have more things in there because you can make a better paddle if you got a lot of little bone thingies sticking around in there to make a nice flipper surface. And so
here's a nice side note for you. 6 finger, the gene for 6 fingers in humans is actually dominant. So if
well, the original vertebrates had even more than that, 6, 7, and 8. And what we got stuck in was that pentadactyl mode, and we're very boring. But dinosaurs, again, like mad.
They went all the way down to like
8, 3 and 2 fingered ones, 4, 3 and 2. They pop up a lot. Animal had another question in there about the bombardier beetle. That one I got a whole section on in Dinomania. Another thing where, look up my stuff, I've got neat shit in there. So the old chapter 3 at TIP, and I'll put the bloody website in there so nobody can pretend I didn't do that.
I saw a video some time ago on the bombardier beetle and how that whole thing came together and actually functions.
It builds off of some very basic chemicals, quinines, that pop up in a lot of different contexts in insects. And making glands is another thing that insects do a lot. You've got the thing that Dwayne Gish in particular got it particularly screwy because he got the moderators backwards. He got the chemistry wrong. And for a biochemist, that was a really sloppy thing to do. For many years, he was arguing based upon another creationist. There was this long daisy chain of ignorance going on here, where somebody had claimed that if you tried to mix the pieces together, it would blow up. So miraculously, the bombardier beetle has been designed to be able to do a miracle of being able to produce this acidic spurt that spurts out the back that acts as a defense mode. Well, it turns out none of that's true. That no, they don't explode. There's a lot of fascinating moderator circumstances, and there was a lot of biology that was done on this over the years, and I've cited all of that in the Dinomania stuff, so I can just refer the reader back to that. But the short form is that you still find creationists trotting out bombardier beetle. Even Michael Behe at one point tried to wave that in one of his books, and I'm going, oh, Michael, do you really want to go there? No, no.
No, Michael absolutely.
Watch out, back,
Michael
get
loves
out, get out.
Michael loves to find just these little bitty hills to die on. You know, the Dover trial. He found several small hills to just die on. Period.
Well, Behe is an interloper. One of the fields that he's stepping on is his own.
Good.
He has expertise to be a biochemist. He's done some published paper over the years, basically in the 70s and 80s and 90s, on protein folding. And they get cited once in a while. He was not a big player in the field. He got the intelligent design bug, Denton's book, which Jackson hopefully will know from reading Slam Dunk just how bad that work was. And so really going on it. He is also apparently a politically conservative Roman Catholic, because he popped up at the Discovery Institute initially back in the early 90s, not because of evolution, privatized Social Security. And so I was going, interesting. Okay. And so he's not a flagellum researcher. He's not an immune system researcher. He's not a cell membrane researcher. He's not any of those fields. Systems. Yeah. And in fact, everybody that works in the field basically says, what the hell? You know, he's like somebody who's never played the violin is trying to tell Itzhak Perlman how to play the violin. I mean, this is not cutting it. Oh, Jackson, yes, you noted that the Alvarezsaurs had one finger on each hand. He had beaten out the Tyrannosaurs that had just two. Allosaurus type tended to have three. Lineages at times because of the digit reduction issue. And then that very same element is going on in eventually in birds, where they're fusing bones together and all this other kind of stuff. Bone fusing.
But
that's another thing that there's so much data out there. To some extent, we're able to retro-engineer a lot of the stuff because we have living examples to go on. So anything that's bird connected, in principle, you can tell a little bit about at least the theropod Maniraptoran set, because those are the immediate precursors, and we can assume that an awful lot of the genetic subsystems that are generating what's going on in birds were going on in them too. And as they start working through paleogenomics, they've already done this for the bird beak, where they pulled away a couple genes and retro-engineered the dinosaur archosaur style snout. And what was fascinating about it is that there was a little bit of a flap over it, because the genes that were thought to be the governing genes in bird beak formation was involved in this study. They had found yet another gene in here, and that's actually much more interesting, which shows you got to be very, very careful in the technical material, because very few systems in evolutionary biology involve just a small number of things like that alanine repeat. That they've got lots and lots of interconnecting modes, and trying to ferret out all the great C changes and dynamics isn't easy. But in that grand path, because we're just about at the end of the hour, and I want to tie up to where we started at the beginning of the show. Point in any of those things are you going to find weird, deformed hiccup mutants. You're going to find biological systems that are functional, and that's the reason why they've led to new forms, is because there is a selection pressure for things that are actually functional. And it was giving an incremental advantage over time. Not everything is adaptive. Some things end up as spandrels, to use Stephen Jay Gould's term, that are things that come about inadvertently because of something else, and then begin to take on a new role. That's largely the arguments behind the formation of the flagellum, is that you've got stuff doing one thing that ends up also being able to do something else on the side, and then eventually this thing that's on the side becomes the thing it mainly does, and it no longer does the thing it started out as. But all of those things will be functional all the way along every single step of the way. And evolutionists are never satisfied until they can work all of that out. And they're the only ones doing the work. Oh, Animal asked about, what about four-winged Microraptor? Yeah, that's a delicious one. I mentioned that several times in various contexts, because Microraptor, and if I were able to dematerialize and go down to my dinosaur collection, I could bring up the fossil, the little model of it that I have. But basically, Microraptor looks like a bird, except it's got feathers on its hind legs as well as its wings. And it's probably not on the direct line leading to birds, but then again, neither is Archaeopteryx. And it means that what you've got is feathered flyers are kind of popular in the Jurassic and Cretaceous in a variety of forms. They're very small animals. They're forming all these little separate niche lines. And what's fascinating about Microraptor is that it did have 4 wings instead of 2. And it was certainly a glider. There was a wonderful NOVA show that was done on that, which you may be able to find online a couple years ago, where they had 2 teams of evolutionary paleontologists trying to work out how it worked. And it inadvertently connects up to the bird evolution debate, because the team that was that doesn't like bird dinosaur model was doing one reconstruction, and the Storrs-Olsen at the Smithsonian and that bunch. And then the team that is particularly major in the dinosaur bird model, Norell and others at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, did another one. And what was intriguing about it is what the team that was the Storrs-Olsen Smithsonian group did. They took the one best fossil, relatively static model of it, put it into wind tunnel tests and that to work it out. And so it was like a big fiberglass thing. It was to scale, but it was relatively fixed. What the team at the American Museum of Natural History did was to look at every fossil of Microraptor, build up a complete composite of the, because not everything was in this perfect, the best one that was a single one. They had pieces from other ones that they could fill in. And then also did a full-scale armature, like the kind of stuff they used for King Kong back in the 1930s, and layered up the skeletal material and then the musculature and the feathers and all that on it. So it had a fully articulatable, posable model that they could test out various things. In other words, they were doing much more sophisticated science than the Smithsonian team. And that's arguably why the bird dinosaur model has been so successful. Into more data, they've dealt with things at a more meticulous level, and they're gradually leaving the non-bird dinosaur group farther and farther behind the data curve. So yeah, that's a fun one to watch. And if you can catch that, I think a lot of the NOVA stuff may very well be available on maybe on PBS's website or whatever. And I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. So the chances are that you might be able to catch it. But yeah, Microraptor, just an opening about how diverse bird and bird cousin lineages were. And we're only looking at the tips of the iceberg here. We have to remember they're very small animals. They've got very small bones. They don't have a good chance of fossilizing. Oh, you were going to jump in there, Jackson?
Yeah, I think it's also pertinent to point out that Microraptor was predicted by the birds are dinosaur people, William B., back in 1915, if I remember correctly. But it wasn't discovered until like 100 years later. So
one thing that threw everybody off for years, and Kevin Pandian has done a retrospective on it a few years ago, and I think I cited it in Slam Dunk, is that there was a big debate between versus arboreal theory of flight origins, which is, did birds come about because they were ground runners with feathers, got lift? Or were they climbers that would jump off of trees and their lift from their feathered arms would be assisting them? And this was a debate that was just on for years and years and years. And it's based on the new information that we have about the dynamics of dinosaurs and all the rest. It's the case that both of them are right and both of them are wrong. It was a matter of both. A largely to be able to climb with its claws up in the air and chase after stuff in the same way that leopards climb trees and hide their prey up in things, but they do a lot of stuff on the ground too. And that the idea that an animal needs to be just one or the other instead of a combination and a dynamic, and that this is occurring in a variety of different ways. This Microraptor clearly was quite capable of gliding like a flying squirrel between trees, and its claws and structures were able to grab onto a tree dynamically very effectively, and they modeled all of that through the computer modeling and the physical modeling that they had from their fully articulated thing. And you couldn't do that with the simpler one that was done by the Smithsonian team. So science marches on, well past 6 o'clock, and I suppose I should call it a halt on here. Thank you, Crocosquirrel and Jackson, for joining us on Evolution Hour 32.
Anytime, RJ.
And
having me.
hope everybody will look up the material and download that stuff and learn source methods and get my books. And if you can throw some money at GoFundMe, the links were all there. Thank you very much. We are today, and I go back on to the exciting world of living.